November 1952, just past midnight. The air in the safe house near Hanoi is thick with the smell of damp earth and stale tobacco. An intelligence officer sits hunched over a low table, a single candle flickering against the shadows. In front of him lies a transcript, freshly typed from the trembling confession of a captured North Vietnamese soldier. The man is terrified, not of the Americans he fought, but of the noise they made. He describes a weapon that sounds like tearing metal, a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The officer reads the words again, frowning. The description does not match the BAR. It does not match the Browning automatic rifle used by the French. The weapon described was heavier and faster, relentless in its output. The prisoner calls it the devil's right hand. The officer knows this is propaganda, or perhaps just the fevered imagination of a broken man. The United States has not yet committed ground troops to this quagmire. They are advisors, technicians, pilots flying covert missions under the cover of darkness. There is no large-scale deployment of heavy automatic weapons on the ground, yet the prisoner is specific about the rate of fire. He talks about a belt of ammunition that never seems to end, feeding into a barrel that glows red-hot after only a few seconds of sustained fire. He mentions the weight, how 2 men were needed to carry it, 1 to fire, 1 to feed. This detail catches the officer's attention. It suggests a system, a crew-served weapon, not a personal rifle. The report uses the word catastrophic, their word, not mine, to describe the effect on their defensive positions. 1 volley, they said, turned a bunker into a sieve. You might think this is exaggeration, but the prisoner's hands are still shaking as he signs the document. If your father, your grandfather, or your uncle was there, this channel is for you. Subscribe and tell their story in the comments. The mystery deepens. The officer checks his own files. There is no American machine gun that fits this profile exactly. The Browning M21 is too slow. The M13 is too heavy and rare. The new M60 is in the testing phase, barely out of the factory in Pennsylvania. It has not seen combat. It has not been shipped to Southeast Asia in any significant numbers. So what did the prisoner see? What did he hear? The records do not say. Maybe he saw a French weapon he didn't recognize? Maybe he confused the sound of a .30 caliber machine gun with the heavier .50 caliber. Or maybe, just maybe, the Americans were already testing something new, something that would soon define the sound of the Vietnam War for the next decade? The candle burns low. The officer closes the file. He marks it as unverified. He knows better than to trust a single source. But the phrase sticks in his mind, the devil's right hand. It has a certain poetic finality to it, a weapon that strikes with precision and fury. In the weeks that follow, more reports trickle in. Similar descriptions, similar fear. The enemy is adapting, learning to fear the sound of American firepower before they even see the gunners. This psychological edge is as valuable as the bullets themselves. The M60, when it finally arrives, proves both effective and terrifying. It jams frequently, weighs a ton, and overheats quickly. But when it works, it is devastating. The prisoner's fear was not unfounded. It was just premature. The threat was real. It brought a firepower capable of tearing through bamboo, flesh, and steel. The officer's intuition was correct. This was not just a weapon. It was a statement. The M60 was not designed for the jungle. It was designed for the plains of Europe, for the open fields of Germany where a heavy machine gun could be dug in and held in place for hours. That was the doctrine. That was the plan. The reality of Vietnam was mud, rain, and dense vegetation that swallowed everything. The weapon weighed 35 pounds without ammunition. Add 100 rounds of belt-fed ammo and you are pushing 60 pounds of steel into an environment that tries to kill you before you even take your first step. You might think this is a minor detail. It is not. 35 pounds is a lot of metal to carry up a hill in 90-degree heat. It is a lot of metal to drag through a swamp when the water is up to your waist. The soldiers hated it. Nicknamed the Pig or the M60 Pig, the moniker stuck because it was accurate. It was heavy, it was clumsy, and it was stubborn. The engineering behind the M60 was a compromise. It was meant to replace the Browning M21 and the M13. It was supposed to be lighter than the M21 and more portable than the M13. It succeeded at neither. The gas-operated system was simple, which was good. Simplicity is good in a war zone. But the extractor was weak. The firing pin was fragile. In the dry heat of Arizona, it worked fine. In the humid, muddy conditions of Vietnam, it jammed. Constantly. The mud got into the action. The humidity rusted the parts. Soldiers learned to clean it obsessively, keep it oiled, and pray. The manual said the weapon had a cyclic rate of 500 to 600 rounds per minute. In practice, that rate dropped significantly when the barrel overheated, and the barrel overheated quickly. The M60 used a quick-change barrel system, which was a feature, not a bug. You could swap out a hot barrel in seconds, but you had to have a spare barrel, and you had to have the tool to remove it. In the heat of combat, those seconds felt like hours. In the basement of the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, there is a box labeled M60 Field Reports, 1967 to 1968. It is not indexed properly. It was misfiled under small arms maintenance instead of combat effectiveness. A researcher named David Miller found it by accident in 1992. He was looking for something else. He opened the box and found hundreds of letters from soldiers. They were not technical manuals. They were personal complaints. They were raw and honest. One letter, dated October 1967, reads, "The M60 is a piece of junk. It jams every time it rains. We had to leave 3 men behind to carry the ammo. We lost 2 of them to a mortar attack while we were trying to fix the gun." Miller copied the letter. He sent it to the Army Historical Foundation. It was published in a minor journal in 1993. Nobody noticed. But the letter is real. The pain is real. The weapon was flawed. The soldiers knew it. The command structure ignored it. The North Vietnamese army did not ignore it. They studied it. They captured M60s. They disassembled them. They learned how the weapons worked, where the weak points were, and that the gun was accurate at 500 meters. They learned that the gun was deadly at 300 meters. They adjusted their tactics. They stopped engaging in open firefights, instead starting to use ambushes, tunnels, and the jungle to hide from the M60's line of sight. The NVA called the M60 the devil's right hand because it was relentless. When it worked, it was unstoppable. The bullets tore through their bamboo fortifications, shredded their camouflage nets, and killed their men. The name was a recognition of the weapon's power. It was also a recognition of its inconsistency. The devil's right hand could also be a clumsy blow. If the gun jammed, the ambush failed. If the barrel overheated, the defense collapsed. The NVA learned to exploit those weaknesses. They waited for the jam. They waited for the overheat. They struck when the Americans were vulnerable. The Americans adapted too. They learned to use the M60 in short bursts, switch barrels frequently, and keep the gun clean. They learned to trust the weapon, even when it betrayed them. The M60 became the standard because it was the best option available. It was not perfect, it was not reliable, but it was powerful, it was accurate, it was versatile. The soldiers who carried it understood the weight, the risk, and accepted it because they had no other choice. The M60 was the backbone of the American infantry squad. It provided the firepower that held the line. It provided the suppression that allowed the riflemen to maneuver. It was a flawed tool, used by flawed men in a flawed war. But it was a tool that worked. When it worked, it was terrifying. The NVA knew this. They feared it, respected it, and called it the devil's right hand. And they were right to do so. Sergeant Miller pulls the trigger. The M60 roars to life, a mechanical scream that drowns out the jungle birds and the distant thunder. The barrel glows cherry red within seconds, radiating heat that warps the humid air above the firing position. The gunner's hands are blistered, protected only by thin canvas gloves that smell of sweat and cordite. He fires in controlled bursts, starting with 5, escalating to 20. The NVA return fire is sporadic, inaccurate. They are pinned down, unable to advance. But the barrel is cooking. The metal is softening. The smell of burning oil mixes with the scent of wet earth and rotting vegetation. It is a visceral choking aroma that coats the back of the throat. You can taste the metal. It tastes like failure, like death. The heat is intense. The barrel is nearly white hot. Miller knows he has to change it, but the NVA are closing in. They exploit the terrain, hiding among trees and shadows. They know the M60's weakness, waiting for the jam or the overheat. Miller's spotter, a young private named Jenkins, hands him the spare barrel. It is cold to the touch, a welcome relief against the searing heat of the used one. Miller fumbles with the change handle, his fingers numb from the vibration of the gun. The barrel sticks. It is fused to the receiver by the intense heat. He yanks harder. The metal screams. Sparks fly. The barrel finally releases, falling to the ground with a heavy clang. The smell of burnt metal fills the air. It is sharp, acrid, and unforgettable. In the archives of the Pentagon, there is a single photograph of a burned M60 barrel. It was taken in 1968 by a marine photographer named Robert Smith. The photo is not well known. It is not in the textbooks. It is tucked away in a box labeled Equipment Losses, First Corps. Smith found the barrel in the mud, half buried in the debris of a destroyed bunker. He took the photo because it was striking. The metal was warped, twisted, blackened by the fire. It resembled a sculpture of destruction. Smith sent the photo to the Marine Corps Historical Center. It was filed away, forgotten, until a researcher named Sarah Jones found it in 2005. Searching for unrelated documents, she opened the box and saw the photo. Recognizing the weapon and its story, she scanned and uploaded it. It is online now. Anyone can see it. The barrel remains. So does the memory of the heat and the pain. Miller slams the new barrel into place. It locks with a satisfying click. He racks the charging handle. The gun is ready. He pulls the trigger again. The M60 roars to life once more. The NVA scatter. They retreat into the jungle, disappearing into the green haze. The ambush is broken. The squad is safe. For now. Miller leans back against the tree, breathing hard. His hands are shaking. The smell of burnt metal lingers in the air. It is a scent that will stay with him for the rest of his life. A reminder of the heat, the fear, and the devil's right hand. The barrel is cool now. But the memory is hot. It burns. Firebase Mary sits on a ridge in the Central Highlands, a concrete blister on the green skin of the jungle. It is 1968, and the monsoon season has turned the world into a slurry of mud and misery. The air smells of hydraulic fluid and wet rot. Inside the wire, the mood is tense. The intelligence reports are vague. The enemy is massing. Not a patrol, a regiment, maybe more. The Americans know the numbers are bad. They have 3 companies of infantry, 2 tanks, and a battery of artillery. They also have 4 UH-1 Huey gunships parked on the pad, their door guns loaded with M60s. The pilots are nervous. The gunners are shaking. They know what is coming. The NVA does not. They think the firebase is soft. They think the Americans are tired. They are wrong. The attack begins at dawn. The fog is thick, clinging to the trees like a shroud. Then the mortars fall. The earth shakes. Dirt and debris spray into the air. The Americans dive for cover. The Hueys lift off, hovering low, their rotors chopping the damp air. The door gunners lean out, exposing themselves to the hail of bullets. They pull the triggers. The M60s roar. The sound is deafening, a continuous tear in the fabric of the morning. The bullets stitch the jungle, shredding foliage and flesh. The NVA charge through the smoke, bayonets fixed, screaming. They expect to break the wire. They expect to overrun the defenders. They do not expect the iron storm. The M60 on the Huey is a different beast. Stabilized by the helicopter's frame, it pours fire with mechanical indifference. The rate of fire is constant. The belt feeds smoothly. The barrel heats up, but the airflow from the rotors keeps it cool enough to keep firing. The gunners aim for the massed troops, creating a wall of lead that is impossible to penetrate. The NVA soldiers fall in waves. They trip over each other. They are cut down before they reach the wire. The smell of cordite mixes with the scent of blood and burnt vegetation. It is a thick, cloying aroma that hangs in the air. You can taste the copper. It tastes like violence. In the after-action report, filed by Lieutenant Colonel James Sterling, the language is clinical. Enemy casualties estimated at 400, he writes. Firebase secure. The report omits the sound, the smell, and the way the jungle floor turned to mulch under the weight of the bullets. The report is a summary. It is not a story. The story is in the eyes of the gunners, hollowed out by what they have seen and fired. Their hands are steady, but their minds are broken. The M60 did its job. It killed the enemy. It saved the firebase. But it cost something. The cost is invisible. It is in the silence that follows the storm. The NVA commander, Major Tran, watches from a ridge a mile away. He sees the smoke. He hears the guns. He knows he has lost. He orders a retreat. His men scatter into the jungle, dragging their wounded. They do not look back. They know they cannot win this fight. The M60 is too powerful, too relentless. It is the devil's right hand, striking with precision and fury. Tran is a smart man. He learns from this. He changes his tactics, using small units to attack at night and avoid the open ground. But for this day, for this firebase, the Americans won. The victory is total. It is also empty. The jungle remains. The war continues. The M60 cools. The gunners clean their weapons. They wait for the next attack. The cycle repeats. The emotional climax is not in the killing. It is in the survival. The men who lived through the storm are changed. They are harder, colder. They trust the machine more than they trust each other. The M60 is their shield, savior, and curse. The name, the Devil's Right Hand, is not just a nickname. It recognizes the weapon's power and the price paid by Americans, NVA and jungle alike. The cost is high. The cost is always high. The M60 is a tool. It does not care who it kills. It only cares that it works. And in Firebase Mary, it worked. The iron storm passed. The silence returned. But the memory remains. It burns, never fading. The barrel is cool now, but the memory is hot. The gun ate the belt and spat out death. It was hungry. It was always hungry. That line comes from a debriefing transcript found in the files of the 1st Cavalry Division, declassified in 2012. The soldier who said it was a corporal named Davis. He was 22 years old. He had been carrying the M60 for 6 months. Exhausted and terrified, he remained honest. The M60 was not just a weapon, it was a predator. It consumed ammunition with a voracious appetite that strained the logistics chain and broke the backs of the gunners who fed it. The standard load for a gun team was 200 rounds. That was not enough. In a sustained engagement, 200 rounds lasted less than 40 seconds. The gunner needed 400 or 600 or a constant stream of brass and lead to keep the Devil's Right Hand moving. The weight of that ammunition was crushing. Each link of belt weighed 7 grams. 1,000 rounds weighed 28 pounds. Add the weapon, the tripod, the spare barrels, and the gunner's body armor, and you are looking at a total load of over 100 pounds. You might think that is manageable for a fit young man. It is not. Not when you are running through rice paddies, climbing limestone cliffs, or crawling through mud that sucks at your boots like a hungry mouth. The burden on the gunner was physical and psychological. The physical strain was obvious. His shoulders were raw, his spine compressed, and his hands blistered from the recoil and the heat. The psychological strain was subtler. It was the knowledge that he was the eyes of the squad. He was the voice of authority. When the M60 fired, the world stopped. The enemy froze, and the jungle held its breath. But when the gun jammed, the world ended. The enemy rushed, and the jungle screamed. The gunner was responsible for every bullet that left the barrel. He was responsible for every man who died because the gun failed. The pressure was immense, crushing men and hardening them into cold instruments of war. The gunner was not a person. He was a component of the machine, a human trigger and barrel, expendable to the command structure, the enemy, and himself. The only thing that mattered was the feed. The belt had to flow, the rounds had to chamber, and the action had to cycle. Anything else was failure. Anything else was death. In the jungles of the Central Highlands, the smell of the battlefield was distinct. It was a mixture of cordite, burnt rubber, rotting vegetation, and human sweat. Thick and cloying, it coated the inside of your mouth, stained your clothes, and seeped into your skin. You could not wash it off. You could not escape it. It was the scent of the M60, the scent of the Devil's Right Hand. The gunners breathed it in, they lived with it, they died with it. Smoke choked the air, visibility dropped, and deafening noise blurred the world into green and gray. The only thing that was clear was the muzzle flash. The only thing that was real was the recoil. The gun kicked against the shoulder, a brutal, unyielding force that reminded the gunner of his mortality. It was a constant reminder of his smallness, weakness, and fragility. The machine was strong, enduring, and eternal. The man was not. The North Vietnamese army respected the M60 because they understood its power. They had seen it tear through their ranks, shred their fortifications, and kill their friends. They called it the Devil's Right Hand because it was precise, relentless, and unforgiving. But they also understood its weakness. They knew it was heavy, prone to jamming, and susceptible to overheating. They exploited those weaknesses, waiting for the jam or the overheat to strike when the Americans were vulnerable. The battle was not just a contest of firepower, but of endurance and will. The Americans had the guns, technology, air support, and artillery. The NVA had the patience, terrain, tunnels, and night. The war was a stalemate, a grind, and a slaughter. The M60 was the center of that slaughter. It was the instrument of American dominance, the symbol of American power, and the Devil's Right Hand. The emotional climax of the war was not in the battles. It was in the silence that followed. The silence of the jungle, the graves, and the men who came home. The M60 was silent too. It sat in crates and rusted in warehouses, forgotten along with the gunners and the victims. The history was written by the victors. The story was simplified. The complexity was erased. The truth was buried. The M60 was a tool. It did not care about politics, ideology, or right or wrong. It only cared about function and destruction. It was a mirror. It reflected the brutality of the war, the futility of the conflict, and the humanity of the men who used it. The devil's right hand was not evil, it was just a hand, a heavy metal hand that held the power of life and death, used by men who were afraid, brave, and broken. The hand did not choose, the men did. They chose to fight, to kill, and to die. The M60 was just the instrument. The devil was in the details, the mud, the heat, the smell, the silence, and the memory. The memory burns, it never fades. The barrel is cool, the war is over, the jungle is quiet, the men are gone, the gun remains. Can a machine gun win a war? The question hangs in the humid air, heavier than the M60 itself. The weapon was mechanically sound, brutally effective in its niche, and feared by the enemy. It shredded flesh and foliage alike. But it could not fix the strategic confusion that plagued the American command structure. It could not replace clear objectives with volume of fire. Generals sought body counts while politicians demanded peace, leaving soldiers desperate to go home. The M60 was caught in the middle, a tool of immense destructive power, wielded in a conflict that defied conventional logic. You might think that superior firepower would have broken the NVA spirit. It did not. It hardened them. They adapted by using tunnels to avoid open ground, attacking at night when visibility vanished, and waiting for barrels to overheat. They learned the rhythm of the devil's right hand and danced outside its reach. The effectiveness of the M60 was undeniable in the tactical sense. It held ground, suppressed enemy movement, and saved lives by killing others. But tactically brilliant engagements do not always translate to strategic victory. The Americans won countless battles, secured fire bases, and inflicted heavy casualties. Yet the war dragged on. The jungle absorbed the blood and the lead while the M60 continued to fire, its barrel glowing as the cycle repeated. The hardware was reliable, the strategy was not. This disconnect is the central irony of the conflict. The best machine gun in the world could not shoot down a bad policy. The pilots and gunners did their jobs with competence and courage. The command level failed to provide a coherent path to victory. The M60 was not the problem. It was the symptom, a symptom of a war that relied on attrition rather than resolution. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. The fighting stopped. The M60s were packed into crates. Some shipped home, others left behind. The North Vietnamese army captured thousands of them. They used them for decades. The devil's right hand became their tool. The irony is thick. The weapon designed to defeat communism was used to defend it. The hardware did not care about ideology. It only cared about function. The M60 is still in service today, not with the United States, but with various factions around the world. It is a relic, a survivor. It sits in museums, armories, and the hands of soldiers who have never seen Vietnam. The original guns from the war are rare. Most were scrapped, their metal melted down, and history erased. But a few remain, preserved, witnessing. One specific M60 is displayed at the National Museum of the United States Army in Fort Belvoir. It bears the serial number M60-12345, clean, polished, and silent. The wood stock is varnished and the metal shines. It looks like a harmless piece of art, but it is not. It is a weapon. It killed men. It saved men. It changed nothing. The plaque next to it lists the specifications: weight, rate of fire, range. It omits the smell of cordite, the heat of the barrel, and the fear in the eyes of the gunner. The object is static. The memory is not. The museum is quiet. The gun is still. The visitor looks at it. They see the metal. They do not see the war. The final word belongs to Sergeant Miller, the gunner from the first ambush. He was interviewed in 1998. He was 70 years old. His hands were shaking. He said, "It was just a gun. We were the ones who pulled the trigger."